was looking at you.
Yeah.
This conference will now be recorded.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the City of Warrenville Public Works and Infrastructure Committee of the Whole regular meeting. It is Monday, February 13th, 2023. Please note that public comment will only be available in person during the meeting. The remote meeting access is for viewing purposes only. Those viewing the meeting remotely will not be able to provide public comment via the remote meeting access. May I have a roll call, please, clerk?
Mayor Brummel,
Here?
Alderman Ashower,
Here.
Alderman Berry,
Here.
Alderman Davalos,
Here.
Alderman Goodman, Alderman Crucial,
Here.
Alderman Kruckenberg,
Here.
Alderman Lockett,
Here.
Alderman Widener.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. If you would all please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now we have citizens' comments. I don't know if anybody has signed up for citizens' comments. I don't think so, but if anyone in the audience would like to make a comment on a certain item during the meeting, they just have to let us know. Okay, thank you. Official and staff comments, Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just a comment on our weekly report. It's always interesting to me how much is going on. You think we have a small town, it would be quiet and not a lot is happening. But every week we get a report of what's happening, both of the activities of staff and the training aspects of staff. And one of the best things about sending staff off to seminars and such is they always come back with good ideas. And we've had quite a bit of training and involvement in out-of-town activities recently, and the community benefits from that. I just want to make you aware of the fact that our folks don't sit around waiting for the phone to ring. They're out there looking for ways to do their jobs better, and they find them, and they bring them back to our community. And the ones that are here are working hard fixing things that are broken. A 6-hour fix for a water main break. I can imagine how unpleasant that was to be down in a wet hole for 6 hours. But that's what our people do for us. So just wanted to say we're grateful.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman.
Thank you. I just wanted to let everybody know what's going on at Fermilab. The Fermilab Community Advisory Board had a recent meeting, and among various other updates, they let us know that the IERC building, the Integrated Engineering Research Center, IERC, is going to be renamed for Dr. Helen Edwards, famous and illustrious local scientist. This bill has been introduced in the last Congress by all local senators and representatives. I guess it didn't get through before Congress ran out of time, so it is going to be reintroduced in the new Congress. They don't expect there to be any problem with that, but I think it's very nice that the IERC building, which is a bit of an unwieldy name, will be named after the illustrious Dr. Edwards. Also, they wanted to let us know that they are planning to do a little bit more opening up over at Fermilab, which is very encouraging. They've signed a contract for new badge readers, and once that has been installed, they eventually are going to allow the atrium and the auditorium to reopen for events, as well as Saturday morning physics, so that students can be back on site and in person. Unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily mean that the arts programming will be beginning anytime soon, maybe by the end of the year, they're hoping, but that isn't clear yet. So here's hoping they can keep working towards making Fermilab more of the welcoming and neighborhood place that it has been to the people in our community for so many years. Thank you.
Thank you. No one else? Administrator? Nothing. Okay, clerk? Nothing. Okay, is there any staff have any comments? Okay. All right, then we might as well get right on to the business of the meeting. Number one, the Public Works Department FY 2024 budget presentation by Public Works Director Phil Kukler.
Thank you and good evening. I'm excited to be here tonight to present the Public Works Department budget and work plan for fiscal year 2024. As I've done the last couple of years, the first few slides are going to be dedicated to what we were working on in the current fiscal year, and then the last few slides will be what we're anticipating for fiscal year 24. So I'm going to start with the utility division in fiscal year 23. With the sanitary sewer system, we've continued with the I&I reduction program, and while there were no major construction projects this year, staff, as we've identified deficiencies in the system, will make the repairs that we can. That might involve grouting leaks. If it's something maybe a little bit more, we might bring in a contractor to perform a specific repair, but we're working toward a larger manhole lining project in fiscal year 24. For the water system, we painted the exterior of the water tower that's on West Street, south of Deal Road in Cantera. The picture on this slide is the result of that, and I think it looks really sharp with the white paint for the tower and the city's new logo on it. The new water tower and well site for the, or sites I should say, for the Southwest District, we worked through property acquisition and the zoning process this year. We closed on the Estes site on December 21st, and we closed just last week on the Thornton's parcel on February 7th. We're working through design engineering with Engineering Enterprises to develop bid documents for the several construction projects that are going to be needed for those sites. There we go. For street division in fiscal year 23, we have the 2022 road program, which consisted of streets that are generally located east of Winfield Road and north of Galusha. And that we used a combination of CMRP money and MFT funding for that project. The trailhead project right out here on Stafford is mostly complete right now. For the winter, the contractors kind of sparingly done work out there. You might notice some mason work that got done during the winter. There's still obviously need to put doors and windows on it, and there are some interior fixtures that'll need to be done, as well as a lot of work still outside with planting and some of the work around the display for the heritage display. The design and property acquisition was pretty busy this year, which is going to tie into like the construction for next year. So it is a busy design year for engineering. Usually means a lot of construction projects in the following year. The 2023 road program is a project we're looking to go out to bid on in March. The Batavia Road project, which is a resurfacing project west of Route 59 toward Fermilab, is a partially federally funded project that we're targeting an April, I think it's late April, like April 28th bid opening with IDOT. The Square Courts, which is a group of roads that are in Summer Lakes that are generally west of Shaw Drive between Continental Drive and Batavia Road, are slated for resurfacing this year. And that's we're looking to advertise for bids in the next couple of weeks after this meeting. And that's got community development block grant funding associated with construction, and that's federal funding that is administered through DuPage County. The Mack Road Bridge and Trail project, we're well into the final engineering on that project, and we're getting close to starting the property acquisition discussions with the residents. The surveyor has been working on plats of easement and things like that to prepare for those discussions and negotiations with the residents to acquire easements for the path project and also for the bridge. The Route 59 Sidewalks and Paths project, this is a segment of Route 59 between Continental Drive and Meadow Avenue and Batavia Road. We are in the middle of preliminary engineering on that, and that's ultimately going to have to go to IDOT for approval before we can finish up the preliminary engineering and then move on to final engineering. And in your packets, this next bullet point was missing. I realized after this went to press on last week, the East Side Storm Sewer project, which was a project that wasn't in this year's budget. The county had a notice of there's an opportunity that we're going to use some of their American Rescue Plan Act funding to fund several stormwater projects throughout the county. So the city submitted a project, and it's the east side. It'll be upgrading the storm sewer on Virginia Avenue north of Warrenville Road up to Central Avenue, and then on Central Avenue between Virginia Avenue and Melcher. So that project is one where we're working on the final engineering right now, and we anticipate going out to bid later this spring with construction to occur this summer. So my third grouping of projects is kind of other projects that don't really fit into just street division or utility division. The first one is the Public Works Reorganization Project, and that's something that is complete now. We had decision packages this year for hiring a new street division worker and a new utility division worker, and what actually happened was we had a utility division worker on staff already that was interested in transferring over to street division. So we went through an interview process with Mark, and the result of that was him transferring to street division. So then we hired 2 new utility division workers in June and July, and hiring Nick and Kevin. to our staff, and they've been great additions, and for the time being, we are fully staffed, so hopefully that stays that way, and I thank council for your support in getting this done quickly, because this wouldn't have happened without your support of the plan and expanding staff by 2 in Public Works. So we're excited to bring up for those changes and see how that helps us. Harding Field is a piece of property that is just south of the Public Works building, and it's a project that, or a property that is being leased by the Park District. It's city property. There's a long-term lease on it. The intent at the beginning when this lease was developed between the city and the Park District was for that property to eventually be transferred to the Park District. We've been working with a surveyor to re-subdivide the property, basically redraw the property line between the 2 lots so that the stormwater elements of the property, the 2 detention ponds and the wetlands, stay with the Public Works building and the city-maintained parcel. And the path and the recreation fields would go in the parcel with the Park District. So at last Thursday's Plan Commission meeting and a council that should be on the next Monday's council meeting for consideration. And once that's approved by council, hopefully, and then the plat is recorded, then we would work with the Park District on the actual transfer of that Harding Field property to the Park District. And there'd be an opportunity, obviously council's got to approve that, and the Park District Board's going to have to approve it. So I think the bulk of that heavy lifting is going to be done in the current fiscal year. It's possible that the actual transfer would happen early in next fiscal year, depending on the timing of meetings and how we're able to get this stuff done. And finally, the tree maintenance and planting program that was proposed by staff and approved by council in December has been incorporated into the fiscal year 24 budget. And right now, actually, street division staff's been out west of 59, and they've actually just crossed 59 to some of like Winchester and I think a couple of the subdivisions to do additional tree trimming. So we're continuing with the maintenance part of that program, and we're anticipating in the fall planting roughly 100 trees on Continental Drive between Route 59 and Johnson School. So looking ahead to fiscal year 24 now, the sanitary sewer system, we're going to continue the I&I reduction program. As I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a large manhole lining project that covers 2 of the basins. We've been trying to go every other year on the large construction projects, hoping to get some efficiency and cost, both with the engineering to prepare the bid documents and also with the contractor having a larger project to bid on that we'd have to end up better costs from the contractor. The next bullet point is for Naperville treatment plant upgrades. And I think we all know that Warrenville's sanitary sewer flows flow to Naperville. We represent roughly 9% of the flows to the Naperville treatment plants. And through our agreement with Naperville, Warrenville is responsible for 9% of the costs for any treatment plant upgrades or expansions. And we had been contemplating over the last several years, since part of our sewer rate increases, to build in about $5 million, which we were anticipating was going to be Warrenville's share of those costs. Late last year, Naperville notified us that their scope of work had increased quite a bit, and obviously with pricing also going up, their costs have tripled. So now Warrenville's share is not $5 million, it's $15 million. So I don't have a lot to offer right now in terms of what our solution is to that. Staff is meeting with Naperville staff first thing tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. And then Wednesday we have an EMRP work group meeting scheduled, and we're going to be working hard to have recommendations ready for council in the coming weeks here. The water system side of things, we're looking at painting another water tower. We're going to paint both the inside and the outside of the water tower that's on Country Ridge Drive. We're going to be working on several projects with the new well site and the new water tower sites for the Southwest District too. We're going to have a project go out to bid later in the year, probably in the fall, for the water tower project on Thornton's property. And there's a long lead time on steel and getting shop drawings approved and everything, so that construction probably won't start till early in 2024. On the well site on Estes, the city staff was out there early in January cleaning up the site. There was a lot of debris and pieces of pipe and things like that. And then over the last week or so, the city had a contractor go in and remove trees consistent with the plan that was presented during the public hearing process and to city council. So what we've got coming in the summer is a mass grading project. We'll go out to bid this spring, and then there's going to be a contractor that'll come and grade the site so it's prepared for drilling the well later, and then eventually down the road building the building too. And then following that mass grading project in the fall, there's going to be a contract to have a contractor come in and drill the well. And kind of weaved into all of this is we're going to have to be working with the property owners. We're going to be meeting with our consultants a few times over the next couple of months to develop that plan. And then we're working with the city attorney on the access agreements that will be necessary to monitor the private wells in the area. And so we'll have a meeting here with the property owners to talk through that and get the access agreement so we can start that process before the well is drilled, so we can get the baseline of the existing wells. And then also while the well's being drilled, we start pumping and testing the water. We're going to be consistently monitoring their wells to see what the impacts, if any, are on their wells. Street division, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be a big construction year for fiscal year '24. We've got the 2023 road program, the Batavia Road resurfacing west of 59, the Square Courts project, and the East Side Storm Sewer project are all projects that will be probably under construction for most of the summer. The Mack Road Bridge and Trail project, we're targeting a November letting of this year, so the construction will probably start early next year if all goes well and we actually hit that letting date. Obviously, we've got a long way to go with the property acquisition and the final engineering to get approved, but that's what we're working toward at this point in time. And then we had a storm sewer lining project for some storm sewer in Winchester and Summer Lakes in the current fiscal year budget. As we've gotten to this point in the year, it's become clear to me there's no way we're getting that done before April 30th. So we've shifted gears and we're going to combine the current fiscal year project with what we plan for next year into one larger storm sewer lining project, and go out to bid on that during the summer, with construction happening probably during the drier months to minimize the amount of flow in those pipes when we're trying to line them. And then on the design and property acquisition side, I'm not envisioning a very big construction year in fiscal year '25, which is represented here by the engineering that we're planning to do in fiscal year '24. We've of course got the 2024 road program, and then the Mack Road project, where it's hopeful that the engineering and property acquisition will be wrapped up well before November. So that's really just the early part of this fiscal year. And then the Route 59 and sidewalk and path project will at some point transition from preliminary engineering to final engineering, and that's when IDOT eventually approves the preliminary engineering report. So finally, I'll touch on the other projects we have for fiscal year '24, and a lot of these have decision packages associated with them. The high-speed garage doors, you may recall, are a decision package in the current fiscal year budget. That's something that, similar to the storm sewer lining, we're just not going to get done this year before April 30th, so I'm proposing to shift that to next year's budget, and we'll get that done during the summer months. The enterprise resource planning software implementation, we are currently working through with the existing vendor to separate from them, and concurrently we're also working to select a consultant that will help us through the process to marry us up with the right software for the new ERP system. So I'm anticipating, right now we're working through that selection process. We're going to try to schedule interviews right now with the top 2 respondents, and then I'm targeting presenting the contract at the Public Works Committee meeting in April, so the second Monday of April. And we'd hit the ground running in May, and that work would take us through the end of this year, with the intent that the City Council will be approving contracts with vendors for software, because I think it's going to be multiple pieces of software, one for Public Works, for community development, and then I don't know total how many pieces it'll be, but I'm hoping those contracts will be December, January approval by council, and then about this time next year, we'd be starting implementation. The keyless entry upgrades for the city buildings, City Hall and Public Works and the police department are all in the same system. The infrastructure at Public Works is newer because we didn't have the keypads originally, but the City Hall and the police department keypads are starting to fail. There's some concern if we keep those going forward, there's concerns about security. There are multiple times where they break down, and the vendor hasn't been particularly good with response in terms of supporting that stuff, and the equipment I think is getting harder to find too. So I'm looking at, I've got a decision package proposed to look at all 3 buildings with replace it with the same system. I think we'll be able to use the existing wiring, so that should be a savings in terms of cost, but we'd have to replace the keypads and the control panels associated with that. What I envision doing is a kind of a request for proposal and not so much of a bid. We'll get pricing, that'll be one factor for sure, but other factors that are important to staff are going to be the ease of use of the software that they have, because the current software is not easy to use, it's not intuitive, and there's not a lot of instruction on how to use it. And also then the support that the vendor provides after construction. So we're looking at, we may end up with the lowest price, but it's very possible we may not, depending on what the best combination of all 3 of those factors are. And finally, the update to the water system model and the sanitary sewer capacity calculations is another decision package. You may recall at the beginning of the Southwest District planning process, we engaged with Engineering Enterprises, and they created a water model of the city's system. At the time, they used the best information we had, which was an AutoCAD atlas. Since that time, we've actually moved that into our GIS system, so there's better, those assets are geolocated, they're more accurate as far as the locations where they're at. the water modeling software actually interacts better with the GIS system than it does with AutoCAD, so that's a plus. And we have now all the as-built information for the new developments too, and we know where the water tower is going and where the well's going. So what my intent is to have the EEI enter into contract with EEI so they can upgrade the water system model to incorporate all of that stuff, calibrate it, and then we're ready to go for any future city projects as well as any future development projects that come in that are proposed, and we can see what the impacts are to our system with those projects. And on the sanitary sewer side of things, the IEPA has kind of an outdated method of measuring or estimating the flows in the sanitary sewer system that are generated by projects. It's been pretty consistently for my whole career, which is over 25 years now, 100 gallons per person per day, and I'm sure it predates me. It was in place for a while before me. With more water efficient fixtures being used nowadays, that the flows that result from the same amount of people in a house or less. So we have an opportunity with the new developments being finished. We know what the population is in them, the occupancy. There should be virtually no I&I because they're brand new systems. We can flow monitor those and compare the flows in the sanitary sewer system with their water bills and their water usage, and then compare that back to what was anticipated before the developments were constructed and when they went through the permitting process. And the value that'll have is as we have more developments come to Warrenville in the future, we'll have a better idea how to predict what their sanitary sewer flows are going to be, and that'll help inform our discussions with Naperville because we're limited on how much water flows we can send to Naperville, and also if there's any issues with the IEPA. So we'll be better armed to have those conversations with developers and with permitting agencies. So with that, I would be happy to entertain any questions.
Thank you. Questions? Alderman Goodman?
I was hoping you could say a little bit more about the Naperville treatment plant upgrades. I think there's a lot of very interesting and important stuff here, and I want to thank you for your detailed presentation, but I feel like this really deserves some emphasis and maybe a little bit more explanation of what's going on with that project that changed the cost of it from $5 to $15 million, because I'm sure everybody else sitting up here wants to know that.
Sure. So originally they were planning on the $5 million, Warrenville's original projected $5 million share was to address IEPA required changes for phosphorus treatment to get more phosphorus out of the water, out of the effluent released from the treatment plant. And those improvements were anticipated to be about $50 to $60 million total, with Warrenville share being about $5 million. Since then, they had somebody new come in that's in charge of the department there, and they started looking at the treatment plant as a whole. They have some equipment that's like 50 years old. They have additional capacity they need, not so much for the water flowing there, but for the solids and being able to treat the solids that are coming out of the water. And so while everything's more expensive right now, that's a factor in the cost increase. The primary factor is they just increased the scope of work. There are several projects instead of just one now. And they're anticipating, the schedule they've given me is about an 8-year time frame to get those constructed and to make those upgrades and changes. So far, Public Works has spoken with their technical staff, and they're open to working with the city. And part of the conversation tomorrow, we're going to have both city administrator and city manager there. The finance director is going to be there as well as their finance people, so we can try to see what options there might be for us to hopefully spread those costs out over a longer period of time. Because there's no way we're going to be able to incorporate $15 million into our rates immediately. That's just going to be too huge of an increase. So we're trying to look at options with them to make that easier for Warrenville. And they've indicated so far that they're flexible. City Administrator White's spoken with their city manager, and he's indicated that they're willing to work with us. My counterpart in Naperville has indicated they're willing to work with us. They realize that they sprung this on us kind of at the last minute, and it's a huge nut for us to crack here.
Alderman Lockett?
Just to kind of piggyback off of that, if we are responsible for the 8% and they're expanding everything, their capacity, does that mean moving forward we'd be responsible for less?
The way they calculate it is based on the actual flows, so they track our flows going to them now, and they know what the flows are at the treatment plant, so it'll be based on actual percentage of flow. So if our flow ends up being if it's not 9% like it's historically been, maybe it's 8.5 or 8.3, it'll be based on the actual percentage of flow. So it's possible it'll be less.
But it's not going to be half.
No.
Right, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Widener?
Yeah, thanks. Could you go over when will we break ground on the Mack Road Bridge?
So for a Mack Road Bridge project, we'd be with a November letting, assuming it goes that way, which we're planning. Typically, IDOT takes like 45 days to review the bids and then award the project. Depending on the results of the bids, if they're higher than what was expected, they'll need city concurrence on that award. They may still need that anyway, even if the bids are what we expect. And then there'll have to be a pre-construction meeting at IDOT. And so you're probably looking at the soonest, if that bid letting, I think, is like November, it's mid-November. You're probably looking at sometime maybe February, and it really depends on, again, what the weather's doing at that point. I'm envisioning the time frame to be very similar to what we did with Williams Road Bridge, which is it'll take the entire construction season. So by bidding going out to bid in November, if there's favorable weather earlier, if we have a warm winter, if it kind of ends earlier, then they can start sooner on that project. And the idea is to get the bridge back open before the next, by the next fall or winter.
So we're February 2024 ideally,
Yep.
or after in the spring of 2024, depending on how all the engineering approvals go and so forth?
Yes.
Okay. With that and other projects, will you be coordinating with the public affairs individual to notify residents and give, commercial people who might be using the road in, for this and other projects as part of your work program? Will it be included as that, in that as part of, the future? Like,
Yeah.
I'm thinking, also with the water tower, keeping our residents posted on some of the projects that Public Works is involved with would be, really important. And sometimes the more notice you give people, the more ready they are to accept it when the, construction begins. I just wondered whether that's an inclusive part of your work program.
Yes, we'll be working with Paula, our communications coordinator, on communications with the residents, also getting stuff out, not just directly to the residents, but on Facebook, on the website, and multiple ways to communicate. Typically on a project like Mack Road, for instance, there's going to be also changeable message boards, the electronic message boards that go up weeks in advance of anything getting closed, so people have plenty of warning, and there'll be a detour set up in advance too to help guide people around that in advance of just like closing the bridge one day. So that's just part of the construction, but I think Paula being on staff here is going to be a huge help with communicating with some of these larger projects that have kind of a farther reaching impact, communicating out what's going on.
And then for the new tree program that we're recommending, will that project include the drafting or changes of any new or old or existing ordinances, or is that strictly the in the field project work? Because I know we're dealing with some ordinances and policies that may need to be, changed or updated.
Well, right now it's primarily the field work, but also looking at reviewing our tree planting, the trees, the species we actually allow residents to choose, and that we're gonna have to revisit that list and make sure it's current for what we want. So we're sharing that with the residents to make their choices. When it comes to like the tree ordinance, I know there's a grant opportunity potentially this coming fall, where in order to qualify for that grant, you would have to at least commit to changing or to adopting like a tree preservation ordinance. And I know we talked last year a little bit about there's different levels like bronze, silver, and gold, and we'd start with the bronze level for starters. And so I would coordinate that with the grant process at the time. So I have every indication that they're going to offer that grant again, so it's something we'll look at with the grant.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Brummel?
Thank you. Thank you, Phil, for the comprehensive report on all the activities. As I mentioned earlier, it's amazing the things that we get done in this town. I got a call from former Mayor Lund today, and she's still keeping an eye on things, and she has noticed the improvements we're making down here with the trailhead and the great job that Lance Hack's done with the roundhouse. And she said, what are the plans for the Veterans Memorial? And I was pleased to see that in our work plan here, that one of our Tier 2 initiatives is to develop a recommendation by the end of the year to make improvements on the Veterans Memorial. So I'm glad to see that's in there. She makes a good point. Things are looking really good, and that has been 20, 25 years, and it's getting a little bit ragged. So I'm glad to see that's in the program, so I appreciate that.
You're welcome. And it definitely is. One thing we're working through right now as staff is the looking ahead. We had a 5-year kind of look ahead for projects in the CMRP. We started to expand that to 10 years, and now we're working on 15 years, trying to get as much as we can in there and see how we can keep the cash flow kind of consistent, because we have a limited amount of money that's coming into the CMRP, so we want to make sure we're not overspending out of it. So the Veterans Memorial improvements could be potentially fiscal year '25 or fiscal year '26 as far as when they would actually be budgeted for construction, but we want to look at that this year and have a recommendation ready so we know what direction we're going with it.
It's good to hear. Vivian, we've got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you very much, Director Kukler. Number 2, consideration of an agreement for information technology managed services agreement with All Information Services. This will be presented by Assistant City Administrator Ellen Morgan.
Thank you. The IT services contract with All Information Services expired in December of this past year. Although city staff intends to issue a request for proposals, in the interim, we still need AIS's services to help us with IT needs during that interim time. Included with your agenda backup material is an agreement that extends services through the end of December. AIS agreed to maintain their pricing from 2022 through 2023. And I am happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Alderman Lockett?
I just had a question about their out of scope of work. They say to reference Schedule B or C for the pricing schedule. Do we do a lot of out of scope work with them?
Right now, we have a couple of out-of-scope projects, one of them being the, I'm drawing a blank on the title of it. The computer replacement project is one of the projects that are outside of the scope of the contract. So that project and also the multi-factor authentication project is outside of the scope of services. So at this time, I believe we have about 4 projects that are ongoing that are outside of the scope. We don't have any new ones proposed yet for this coming year.
Okay, and when they do those, do they give you like a lump sum or like hourly rates?
A combination of both.
Okay. Is there any way to get them to give us their hourly rates so that we have a record of them? Because I didn't see them on here. They said to see the exhibits, but they're not on those exhibits, Schedule B or C. It was number 26.
Okay, I can get that for you.
That'd be awesome. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Alderman Goodman?
I think with that information, I'd like to make a motion to recommend the City Council approve an agreement with All Information Services Incorporated, AIS, for a 12-month term at an annual cost of $104,496.
Second.
We have a motion by Alderman Goodman and a second by Alderman Davalos. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Is that right? Or was I supposed to have a vote? Okay. Oof. Okay. Thank you. On to number 3. Consideration of long-range financial planning work group recommendation to issue debt for the new water tower and well site. Administrator White, please.
Thank you. As Phil mentioned in his presentation, the city has now purchased the 2 properties to construct the new well and water tower in the Southwest District. Last year, the city engaged Spear Financial to assist with the debt issuance needed to cover the associated costs of the project. The Long-Range Financial Planning Work Group is recommending general obligation bonds, which provide the lowest cost of borrowing for the city. The recommendation of the work group includes repaying the bonds with revenue from TIF number 4. Tonight, we have with us Anthony Maselli, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, of Spear Financial, to provide a brief presentation of the debt options that were provided to the Long Range Financial Planning Work Group and to answer questions about the process. And Finance Director Dahlstrand is also here with us this evening in case there are any questions.
There we go. All right. Good evening, everybody. So I'm going to go over the kind of a truncated version of the presentation that we walked through with the Finance Committee. when deciding on the issuance of general obligation bonds. Please, stop and ask questions as we go if there's anything, on each slide that you wanted to cover. So there were three borrowing options that we had considered at the onset of this process. The first being general obligation bonds, which are backed by the full faith and credit of the city. The city, as a home rule entity, can issue these without going to referendum. There's no statutory debt limit and maximum term of 40 years. Currently, we're looking at a max of 20 years for the issuance, but playing with the final maturity to coincide with the life of the TIF district. You do not, because these are full faith and credit backed by the city, you do not need a debt service reserve account, which is just a account that you fund, usually equal to 1 year of debt service that is pledged to the bondholder. So if there's ever a missed payment, that amount of money would be sitting aside for the bondholders. At the retirement of the debt, that amount is released, but it does sit in an account secured to the bondholders. You can't use it for any other city needs until the debt is paid off. Again, the general obligation structure represents the lowest cost of borrowing to the city versus the other two options we're gonna talk about. And I think importantly, and something that we actually put in the debt policy, is that the property tax that secures the bonds, the general obligation bonds, can be abated each year, and then you use other revenues on hand to pay the debt service. So while there is a property tax that will go in place when we close on the bond issue, each year when you do your normal course of tax levies, you can then do an abatement ordinance to take that property tax off for the coming year. So for a city taxpayer, they would never see that on their tax bill. The other option we looked at, given the nature of the projects, were water and sewer revenue bonds. These would be backed by the net revenues of the water and sewer system of the city. Again, 40-year maximum term. With a pure revenue issuance, you typically need a debt service reserve account. So you would need to bond for that extra amount to sit in an account for pledge to the bondholders. You'd also need to demonstrate what's called debt service coverage. So for, say every dollar of debt service, you need to show that you have, 1.2 or 1.3 times revenue. And those are requirements not only for the bondholders, but also when we go to the rating agencies to show that there's adequate protection for the bondholders, and so you can get an adequate rating. The water and sewer revenue bond option would be a higher cost of borrowing than your general obligation bonds. And this isn't going, I'm not noticing that, sorry. No, you're okay. Sorry, technical difficulties. I didn't realize you're just looking at my cover page. All right. Now we're good. Except I can't see. Can I click over here?
Yes.
That doesn't, okay, perfect. Not perfect. Okay. There we go. And then finally, we looked at TIF revenue bonds. So given, again, the nature of the project in the TIF district and the intent to use TIF revenues for the repayment of the bonds, we looked at a pure TIF revenue bond issuance. So this type of issue would be backed by the incremental revenue produced by the TIF district. These type of TIF revenue bonds can often require some sort of a secondary pledge, just because the nature of TIF district revenues being somewhat risky depending on the TIF district, but not all the time. You cannot extend the term of the bonds beyond the life of the TIF district when you're doing a pure TIF revenue pledge. You would be generally required to have a debt service reserve account for the protection of the bondholders. And you need to, again, demonstrate revenue coverage, this time a little bit higher because of the inherent risk of TIF, straight TIF revenue bonds. So you'd be looking at about 1.5 times revenue. Of the three options, the TIF revenue would be the highest cost of borrowing to the city. Let me see if I can, oh, did it again. I think I keep messing it up because they're not the same here. Sure. No, you're fine. Oh, there we go. Can we, yeah, let's go to that one. Then I can see them both, because right now I'm watching that one.
All right, let's go back here. And I'll let you do the.
All right, up here.
No, right.
Oh, yeah. There we go, okay. Yes. Okay. So this is a summary of the three options. This has been updated for the current numbers, so it's a little bit different than what we had talked about originally in the Finance Committee, but the relationship is the same. So looking at scenario one, for an issuance of general obligation bonds, assuming current interest rates and estimated costs, we've got a current par amount or an issuance amount of just under $9.4 million to provide for a project deposit of $10,450,456, which is the current estimate for the cost of the project. The relationship here, the reason you're issuing less than the $10 million is because municipal bonds, tax-exempt municipal bonds are often issued at premium. So the investor will pay you a higher amount of money for the bonds, which is typical of tax-exempt bonds. So we'll talk about the relationship of that, but that's why that's occurring. You receive a premium for the issuance of bonds. We don't know what that amount is. This is just estimates based on current rates. Total debt service for that issuance, so for your issuance of $9,370,000 over a 20-year life, your total debt service would be $15,353,000. Average annual debt service about $750,000. Total all-in cost of 3.8% right now is the estimate. The all-in cost is interest rates plus all costs to complete the financing. So we look at that second scenario, which is the water and sewer revenue bonds. Par amount jumps up to $10,245,000. Reason for this is we're getting a little bit less premium with the higher interest rates. Also, we're bonding now for a little bit more because we have to fill that debt service reserve account. So there's $824,000 in debt service reserve that would need to be funded. Total debt service is $16,789,000 over the life of the loan, about $822,000 per year. All-in cost, 3.947%. And then finally, going to scenario three, TIF revenue bonds, bonding for $11.3 million now, $11.31 million. Again, project deposits the same, $10,450,000. You got a total debt service of $18,534,213. So now you've got your highest cost of borrowing with the TIF revenue bonds, looking at about 4.9% all-in cost. When we discuss, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but when we discussed the Finance Committee, the thought was it's amongst home rule entities in the state of Illinois, it is most common to see them issue general obligation bonds due to the fact that it's the lowest cost of borrowing, and then abate that property tax each year using the revenues that you had expected. Especially in the case of the city, the issuance of a pure revenue pledge doesn't necessarily get you anything other than the knowledge that you could never levy the tax. Beyond that, you're not saving anything or getting any benefits for doing that. There are certainly instances of issuers in the state of Illinois that do issue pure revenue bonds, like a water and sewer revenue. That is, I think, cases where, and I represent a few of them, but there are not many out there, and that is cases where they have a number of general obligation issues already for other city projects, and they have a large water and sewer program and want to delineate those two things. But in most cases, it's done with a general obligation bond. So I think that was the driving force behind that, and not really gaining anything by going to a pure revenue pledge. Straight TIF revenue bonds, the vast majority of those done in the state are for development projects, just because you're transferring risk of the development not coming through to a TIF bondholder, so they're not really done in this instance for a public infrastructure type work. And it's also the highest cost of borrowing here. So you're paying more and getting the same thing, I think was what we had come down to.
Don't mean to interrupt, but I just want to make sure everybody in the public and that's listening knows that what you said on your first slide, that even though we have a general obligation bond, so I'm asking you to confirm, we can use TIF dollars to pay that off. We can use a number of sources. Does not have to just be out of the general fund, right?
That's absolutely
I just wanted
correct.
everybody to be sure we got that.
Yes, any legally available revenue, including TIF dollars, can
Okay.
be used on that.
Thanks.
Yes,
Nice to see you again.
nice to see you.
I believe one of the things that you said to us early in this process really clarified the difference for me between these three things, which had to do with how much we believe that TIF revenue is coming. So if we don't want to take the risk of not getting TIF revenue, you would go for TIF revenue bonds, which I think made the most sense to the group of us originally, since it's a TIF-eligible project. But you'd put that risk on the bondholders. And we would have to pay extra for not having that risk ourselves. Now, our situation is very different than that. Our TIFs are already pretty successful. They have quite a lot of building in them. I think from my perspective, the thing that was very clarifying that you said was that there isn't much risk here. And so if we do plan to pay these debts with TIF funds, and we as a council feel quite confident in our TIF projections and the apartment buildings that have already been built in the TIFs and which are generating increment even now, that we should be as stingy as possible and save as much of the taxpayers' money, get the cheapest possible borrowing costs, feeling very secure in that risk that we will be able to use TIF money rather than property taxes to pay this debt.
Right, that's absolutely correct. And to that point, you are going to be, intending to use TIF dollars, and nothing there stops you from using other legally available revenues before you even get to any sort of property tax to pay that debt service, should circumstances change in the future. But again, where you see a pure TIF revenue and where you typically see issuers transfer that risk to the bondholder is in a pure development-driven deal, where you are giving TIF dollars to a developer for infrastructure related to a development. Things haven't been built yet. You're not sure what's going to happen. A lot of the performance is dependent on what's going to happen with that developer and them coming through. And then you don't want to put your full faith and credit pledge onto this project. So you put a TIF on it. They pay more in interest to a bondholder who is accepting more risk, but that's inherent in what that is, right? It's a development-driven deal. This is a kind of a different situation here. We've got a performing TIF and public infrastructure type water projects that need to go into that TIF where you intend to pay for TIF revenue. So it's a different animal. And yes, if you're comfortable in those projections, you're, by putting a pure TIF revenue on it, you're paying more when you don't really need to.
Okay, so you're comfortable in recommending scenario 1 to us because it will save our taxpayers money. That's the bottom line.
Yes,
Okay, thank you so much.
absolutely.
For the average taxpayer, what does that abatement mean? And what will that look like on their tax bill? And how can they expect to see that play out?
Sure. So actually, they would never see it on their tax bill.
Okay,
So what would happen is, when we close the bond issue, we file with the county all of the tax levies through the whole schedule of the bonds, 20 years. Every December, no later than February every year, whenever you do your normal tax levy, you would also abate that upcoming year's tax related to the bond debt service. So before tax bill ever gets issued, that portion of your rate doesn't get extended. So it would never show up as
Okay,
long
so-
as you abate it.
the average taxpayer is not going to see this, and if they don't know what's going on, it won't make any difference to them. And we're very secure in our TIF ability to pay this. It's a safe way to do it, and by my calculation, over the period of the loan, it saves almost $3 million for the taxpayers. Seems like the best way to do things.
Right, absolutely.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions? Okay. Did you want to proceed? Do you have anything more to
Just
present?
a couple slides on timing, and then I can wrap it up and
Okay.
take too much of your time. So we've, started with the bond transaction. Currently, we're having a rating agency call actually later this week. The plan is to conduct the bond sale March 20th, and then be back in front of City Council that evening to accept the terms of the bond sale. Current plan is for a competitive bid process, so we'll have an underwriter come in, we'll have the winning underwriter that evening, and that'll be done through a competitive bid. And then we would close April 12th. So that's the current timing. At this point, don't expect any changes from there. So the next time you'd see me, it'd be March 20th for delivering the results of the bond sale.
Alderman Lockett?
So for the rates, this is rate driven, right? Is it a fixed rate for the 20-year duration for the city?
Yep.
Okay. And is now a good time or is now a bad time?
Well, here, my next slide, actually.
Okay. Well, it's going down, so
Yeah.
it's going to go all the way down, I
Yeah,
think.
so, it's been interesting. I would say that. Last year was interesting. We had a large run-up in interest rates. With inflation and all of the other things that happened last year. I would say that, the Fed's done a lot to try to bring down inflation, but by doing that, they're raising short-term interest rates, which we all know is happening. So we've got a situation now where we've got an inverted yield curve. Short-term rates are higher than long-term rates, but long-term rates are coming down a bit, especially in the municipal market. So actually, I think we're down about 100 basis points since last October on the long-term side. And we're issuing 20-year bonds. If we were issuing 2-year bonds, you'd see that big jump from due to the Fed's actions. But things are settling down. I think we're my last estimate, which is right here. So this is the preliminary debt service. Last estimate was all in tick of around 380. I think that's a little conservative, but that was my last estimate. So I think it's a good time. I think the market's definitely feeling better than it was last year. We've had some successful sales this year.
I guess the question, would be for staff. We have to do this fast? I mean, I know it's a gamble, right? The rates could go up too, or they could go down. But if we're doing this in April or, March, right, we don't have the time, correct?
Correct. We need to start getting these improvements in place because it takes so long to construct the water tower and the well and that process that it'll be a couple of years before the well's online.
Okay, so it is somewhat urgent that we need to do this. Okay.
And I'll mention that, so municipal bonds are callable, refinanceable at after a certain period of time.
That was gonna be my other question. Can we pay it off early if we,
And it's, so right now, I believe we've got a call date structured for 2032. So you would, at that point and any time thereafter, you can refinance the bonds or pay them off early, or any combination thereof.
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other comments? Mayor?
Yeah, one last thing on the TIFs. We are not taking a guess about the performance of the TIFs. We have established TIFs who are already performing at a level or above a level that we anticipated. So for us to depend on repaying this money with TIF money is a pretty sound proposal. We're not taking a huge risk, as I understand this, correct? As you've looked at our TIFs and you see that this performance is there, it's already established, we can anticipate that it's going to continue. So the risk of depending on the TIF money to repay this is very, very small, correct?
Right, that's correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Alderman Goodman.
I have one last question for staff. I'm not sure if this is for Phil or Kevin, but how sure are we about the total amount that we need? Because I know it's gone up quite a bit lately. I know that, this project is more expensive than if it had gotten off the ground when we first tried to do this, and we've been delayed by the property owners. How sure are we that in the next couple of months, when we go out for bid for this total, that we're not going to be short on the amount of money this project will cost?
We're as sure as we can be, I guess, until we start seeing the bids come in. It's, Engineering Enterprises updated this just very recently with their current estimate and schedule to get this done. So I'm as sure as I can be. They know more than I do about the market out there for building water towers.
What do we do if we're under?
It's a good question. I'm not sure. It's something we'll have to visit. We'll have a bid on the water tower later this year. We'll start seeing earlier in the year with the, not before the bond issue, but early in the year what the construction costs are starting to look like. I don't know. I mean, as we get farther along, if at the end of the, I don't know. Simple answer, I don't know. I'd have to talk, Kevin probably be in better position, maybe answer that, how we would fund it, but.
The TIF is currently projected to have more than enough revenue to deal with this over the long term, and even if it were to be in excess of what we have now with the ability to call those again in 10 years or so, I think it would be more than sufficient. We could rework out our numbers at that point, and there'd be more than sufficient TIF incremental revenue to deal with that issue.
Okay, that's very reassuring. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, anything else? All right, thank you very much for your presentation.
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay, we have to have a motion. Alderman Lockett?
I'd like to make a motion that City Council direct staff to proceed with a general obligation bond issuance as presented by Spear.
Second.
We have a motion by Alderman Lockett, a second by Alderman Goodman. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you. On to number 4, consideration of Creekside Printing and Bid Award. This would be City Administrator White.
Thank you. The city contracts out the printing and distribution of the Hometown Happenings newsletter, which goes out monthly. A request for proposal was issued, and staff is recommending a 3-year agreement with Creekside, which is the current printer. We've had a good experience with them for the last few years, and the only variables that I would add to the 3-year agreement is that with fluctuating costs of paper, the paper pricing is 6-month increments. To ensure better pricing, we didn't want to lock in longer than that, and they can't really lock in longer than that because of the fluctuation in pricing. The second variable is a change or increase in the number of service addresses would require additional copies of the newsletter printed and delivered. I just also want to note the contract with the printer does not include the cost of postage. That is always separate of the printing and distribution costs. And with that, I'll answer any questions.
Comments, questions? None? Okay, Alderman Goodman?
No questions. I'd like to make a motion to recommend the City Council approve a 3-year contract for newsletter printing services with Polaris Creekside Publishing.
Second.
We have a motion by Alderman Goodman and a second by Alderman Davalos. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Number 5, consideration of Lexington Homes temporary license agreement for construction trailer in public right-of-way. This is Senior Engineer Hocking, please.
Thank you and good evening. Lexington Trace Unit 1, that's the original Lexington Trace development, is substantially complete. I would say about 99% complete, and staff will be recommending the reduction of their development security at the next city council meeting. Lexington Trace obviously right now is in the process of building what we call units 2 and 3 adjacent to the original development, and they currently have a construction trailer that they use for unit 1 on the right-of-way of Bremen Court. They would like to leave that construction trailer on where it is currently located while they do a couple of more improvements on the unit 3 area, which is located on the northwest, I guess, corner, just south of Butterfield Road, west of the main intersection right there. And because of that, we don't currently have our revocable right-of-way covenant agreement form doesn't really cover something like this. That's more of a permanent item in the city's right-of-way. And this is a temporary location of the construction trailer in the public right-of-way. I worked with the city attorney, Brooke, to come up with a license agreement for this construction trailer. It's provided in the backup material. They plan to have that construction trailer there probably within the next year until some of the more improvements on the Unit 3 can be constructed. More importantly, ComEd needs to get out there and provide electricity out to that area so then they can move the construction trailer over there and power the construction trailer as well. So they've already provided a cash bond for the improvements that remain to be completed around that existing construction trailer, surface, asphalt surface, some minor curb work over there and sidewalk work, and they've already agreed to the license agreement as it's prepared in the agenda backup materials. So with that, I can answer any questions about the license agreement.
Anyone have any comments or questions? Mayor Brummel?
I'm all for helping them out with this. I just have a nit to pick with them. Recently, there was a Daily Herald article about their successful development here in Warrenville and how they were so delighted how things were working out and what a wonderful product they had, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but not one mention of the wonderful community that they're in and how Warrenville made that development success possible by its cooperation. So somebody please remind them that they're in Warrenville and we'd like the credit that we deserve for providing them with a great place for a really nice development, and we deserve some, I guess, recognition for that success as a community.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, a motion, please. Alderman Goodman?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend the City Council pass a resolution approving the temporary license agreement for a construction trailer within the Bremen Court right-of-way.
Second.
We have a motion by Alderman Goodman and a second by Alderman Davalos. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. On to number 6, consideration of amended local agency agreement with IDOT for Deal Road Turn Lane Improvement Project. And again, this is Senior Civil Engineer Hocking.
Thank you. Back in May 2019, the mayor signed a letter of concurrence for the low bidder for the Deal Road Added Turn Lanes project. If you recall, this is the project on Deal Road, west of Winfield Road, expanded some of the turn lanes, added the new turn lane into Target. It was constructed in 2019. And for that, it was bidded through the IDOT process. The low bid was higher than the engineer's estimated cost, And so the original contract that was approved by city council, the actual contract was then more than what was originally anticipated. Obviously, the project is now complete, and it's taken IDOT until now to approve additional use of STP funding, which would cover 70% of those costs for federal, and 30% of those additional costs would be local. So that would resulted in a local cost increase of $23,000, $23,371,000. And this cost, the local cost for that project was a 50% split with DuPage County Department of Transportation. So the actual city increase in cost is about $11,685.50. The IDOT requires an amended local agency agreement, which is included in the backup materials to be signed. Once it's approved by city council, IDOT can finally send the city the final invoice, which we have been waiting for, obviously, and in every budget since that point, we've been anticipating these additional dollars being spent for this project. So there's sufficient funding in the FY23 budget, and if in the FY24 as well, if it has to be carried over to the next fiscal year, because that invoice takes probably about another year probably to come to us. So with that, staff is recommending the city council pass the resolution for this amended local agency agreement.
Thank you. Alderman Goodman.
Better late than never. We appreciate getting these 70% STP funds. I drove through these turn lanes today when I went grocery shopping. It's a very successful traffic improvement, I would say. So I would like to make a motion to recommend the City Council pass a resolution approving the amended local agency agreement for federal participation in an amount of $419,258 that will be cost shared with $268,723 of STP funds and $150,535 local funds.
Second.
We have a motion by Alderman Goodman and a second by Alderman Davalos. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. Number 7, consideration of zoning overlay district preferred consultant. Let's see here. We have Consuelo? Is it Aguila?
Arguelles.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
one of these days.
Close enough. It's
Okay. Assistant Community Development Director.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. I'm excited to be here to present the preferred consultant that's been identified by the work group based on this initiative. A quick reminder, this initiative is part of the fiscal year 2023 budget and allocates $60,000 for this initiative. Before I get to the recommendation of the work group and the next steps for this project, I want to provide some quick background on this project, just to take into account and make sure everyone knows the background information as it relates to getting to this point today. And the work group's efforts and what that has entailed working with staff to get to this point to recommend a preferred consultant for this initiative. So this is a quick overview of my presentation today. I'll start off with the background. There's been quite a bit that has been taking place back starting since 2007 and adopted plans that support this initiative. In 2007, the Old Town Civic Center sub-area plan did identify this general activity to be recognized as goal number 1. And this is to increase the diversity of retail and services in the city, including some housing alternatives and recreational alternatives. In 2015, the Economic Development Plan, as objective number 4, did identify scaling back and providing a new form of higher density residential development, including multifamily housing. And in 2021, the Housing Action Plan, as endorsed by the City Council, did recommend exploring housing options for missing middle and senior housing as recommendation number 1. So these are important initiatives that the city has adopted and recommended approval for that leads us to this point where we're at in terms of moving forward with the zoning overlay district initiative. Further, I do want to point out the Old Town Redevelopment Preferred Plan that the city adopted. This was unanimously supported back on the 21st of March of last year, of 2021. And what you see here are some images of buildings that would fall and be classified as missing middle housing, right? So there's a mix of building types. Some are 2 stories, some are 3 stories, a mix of different building materials that could be examples of what is considered mixed-use development that includes some housing. The Old Town Redevelopment Preferred Plan that you see on the slide, on the right side of the slide, do show what is proposed for the Old Town corner, which is on Batavia and Warrenville Road. But the images here are examples of what that could be in terms of missing middle housing. I cannot underestimate the work and the time that the work group has taken to get to this point. Staff did partner with a work group that was put together consisting of plan commissioners, city council aldermen, a local business owner in town, and the local real estate broker. City staff, along with these members, do make up the work group that have been meeting nonstop since last year on this initiative to get to this point, and will continue to be working moving forward. We worked together on putting together the request for qualifications documents that was disseminated to at least 5 qualified consultants. We did receive 3 responses. We interviewed all 3 in person and followed up with reference checks. Based on those reference checks, we also got together and discussed comprehensively the 3 respondents and identified the final 2 that we wanted to pursue reference checks and got down to the preferred consultant that's before you're here tonight. All were very qualified, but we ultimately ended up preferring one of the respondents because of their background experience in form-based codes and local and national experience on this topic. So our recommendation, the work group recommendation that they designated was Coda Metrics as a preferred consultant, and that's before you here tonight for consideration. Coda Metrics ended up being the best qualified based on form-based codes. Not only do they have experience on the local level, but also nationwide on these type of initiatives in communities from all over the United States. They have a local team that presented here in person that would be in charge of public input and public participation and meeting with staff on finalizing this initiative. Their response was also very detailed. It included a realistic and logical project schedule to get this accomplished. It also included public engagement, listening sessions, field surveys, and community workshops to get public input on this topic. Finally, they did also provide local and nationwide examples of what zoning overlay districts and or form-based codes that they worked on. So we did feel very qualified that this is the best, that they were the best qualified from the respondents to work on this initiative. The next steps to keep in mind, once the recommendation is endorsed by City Council, the next step would include going back to the consultant to work on a detailed scope of services, to finalize the scope of services, negotiate an agreement with Coda Metrics before going to City Council for approval. And with that, open it up for any questions.
Alderman Goodman.
I was very impressed by the candidates that submitted responses. I know Kimley Horn and Tesca have done work with the city before, but Coda Metrics was not a familiar name to me, so they must have had a very impressive interview. And I just wondered what stood out to you.
To me, and I would say to the work group as well, was their direct experience working on form-based codes, not only locally, but also nationwide. So their group, the main contact is someone local, but their work group included a public engagement consultant that they would work with who have experience with doing that, and just strictly public engagement, for example. The group is all together. That was part of their request for proposals. So their partnership with All Together, their partnership with a nationwide consultant focusing on the planning on the code text. The architect herself Leslie, was the primary contact who be overseeing this initiative. She has an architecture and landscape architecture background, so I think it was a combination of all of those things.
Okay, they must be very impressive. I wouldn't second guess the work group's recommendation.
Oh, Alderman Lockett?
Just to piggyback off that a little bit, I was part of the work group, so was Alderman Kruckenberg. Staff brought 3 very qualified people to make it really hard on us. And we had a lot of debate, and that group that was included in there was, it's a very interesting group that we put together with a lot of opinions and a lot of different thoughts and beliefs. And when it was all said and done, we all came to the same answer independently. But you speak of Leslie, she kind of blew our socks off, I mean, with regards to her knowledge, what she knew, and them having the ability to work all over the country. They've seen different things. And I think altogether, if you ever get a chance, look at the website, big fan of them with their marketing. And we also took it as if they knew what they were good at and what they weren't good at. And so they found the best that they could find to complement themselves, which was very important. And I think they're going to do some great work. But staff really made this hard on us, you know, with regards to the people that they had. And there was a lot of time where we actually asked them to go back, get references. They went back, did more phone interviews, and they spent a lot of time on it. So it was definitely worthwhile. So it was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Alderman Kruckenberg?
I was also very impressed with Codometrics. I felt like the fit was there, and I think that they're going to give us what we need and what we're looking for our small town, and I think it's going to really put us on the map. So I'm really looking forward to working with them.
Great.
I hope staff is too.
We are, and thank you for reminding me, not reminding me, but just acknowledging that both Alderman Lockett and Alderman Kruckenberg did serve on the work group. So it's not to minimize your involvement at all. So I thank you for bringing that up. They did participate in the work group, and all the work group members did have a lot of valuable inputs to get to this point, and we'll continue to be working moving forward with the preferred consultants. So thank you.
Alderman Goodman?
I'd like to make a motion to recommend the City Council adopt the Zoning Overlay District Work Group recommendation and designate Codometrics as the preferred consultant.
Second.
I have a motion by Alderman Goodman and a second by Alderman Kruckenberg. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Number 8, consideration of bid letting and construction engineering for 2023 construction projects prior to approval of the FY 2024 budget. Director Kukler, please.
Thank you. This is something we do every year at this meeting. We're anticipating going out to bid on 4 projects before the budget's approved, and we do this intentionally to early in the year before contractors get a lot of projects booked up and on their schedule so that we get better bid prices. So for the 2023 road program, the Summer Lake Square Courts resurfacing project, the Side Storm Sewer project, and the Batavia Road resurfacing project, we're looking for authorization to go out to bid on those 4 projects before the budget's approved. With that, I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Alderman Goodman?
This is something that happens just about every year, maybe not quite this many, but I would like to make a motion to recommend the City Council authorize staff to advertise for bids for the 2023 construction projects outlined in Public Works Director Kukler's February 8th, 2023 memorandum prior to the formal approval of the fiscal year 2024 budget.
Second.
We have a motion by Alderman Goodman and a second by Alderman Lockett. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Number 9, consideration of joint funding agreement for state-led construction work for the Batavia Road resurfacing project. Director Kukler, please.
Thank you. This is a standard IDOT agreement that documents the cost share and the city's commitment to paying its share of the costs for construction of this project. The city has SDP, or a Federal Surface Transportation Program grant, in the amount of a maximum amount of $303,080. The total construction cost is estimated to be close to $800,000, so the city's share is going to be just under $500,000. And IDOT is looking for the city to sign this agreement. Also, there's going to be an ordinance that City Attorney Lenneman is preparing that will document the city's commitment to funding the share of the project if the costs are higher than anticipated. So that Brooke is working that resolution for next week, but this is a necessary step in getting the federal funding for this project. So I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Comments or questions? Alderman Goodman?
Once again, we're always in favor of grant money. I would like to make a motion to recommend the City Council pass a resolution approving the joint funding agreement for state-led construction work for the Batavia Road resurfacing project and committing to funding the city's share of the project.
Second.
A motion by Alderman Goodman and a second by Alderman Davalos. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion passes. Number 10, discussion of the FY 2024 citywide work plan. Administrator White.
Thank you. The citywide work plan will be included and presented in every committee meeting agenda until our budget workshop in March. So if there are any questions or any feedback from the committee on the citywide work plan, we will review and make those potential changes.
Alderman Goodman?
I had one item which I just discussed with Finance Director Dahlstrand about possibly adding an item about the presentation that we just had today from our financial advisor, adding something about financing the borrowing for the water tower via bonds. Because this is new for us and our staff is going to have to spend some time getting up to speed on borrowing and all the details involved in that. I think Finance Director Dahlstrand thought that it should be on the Finance Committee work plan as well as the citywide work plan from the brief conversation that we had before the meeting. And I hope that the council agrees.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. That was a no vote on that, for information only. Number 11 is review and file Public Works Department FY 2023 work program and decision packages status report. And this is information only. Does anyone have any comments or questions about this? Seeing none, I guess we have nothing under miscellaneous, and all we need is a motion to adjourn. Someone, Alderman Lockett?
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you and good evening.
This conference is no longer being recorded.